Owen Reeves had always been the kind of man people forgot to notice. Not because there was nothing to notice, but because he never gave them a reason to look twice. He wore the same 3 shirts on rotation, drove a car that coughed before it started, and spent most evenings in the small back room of the house he shared with Claire Bennett. Hunched over a laptop that hummed louder than he ever raised his voice, Claire used to joke that she could set her watch by him. Dinner at 7, dishes by 8. Then the back room, the door half closed, the blue light spilling out from under it until well past midnight. She used to find it endearing in the early years. Stability, she called it. Now 4 years into their marriage, she had a different word for it. Boring. She didn't say it cruelly. Claire was not a cruel woman. She said it the way people say true things they've been sitting on for months. Quietly, almost apologetically, on a Tuesday night in October while Owen was scrubbing a pan that didn't need scrubbing anymore. "I feel like I'm living with a photograph of a person," she said. "Nothing moves. Nothing changes. You used to have plans, Owen. Now you just have routines." He didn't answer right away. He never did. He set the pan down, dried his hands, and asked her what she wanted him to say. She didn't have an answer either. That was the problem with both of them. 2 people who had run out of language for what was happening, and instead just let the silence do the talking. What Claire didn't know, what she couldn't have known because Owen had never once tried to explain it to her, was that the back room wasn't where he went to disappear. It was where he went to build. 3 years earlier, sitting in a hospital waiting room while his father recovered from a stroke, Owen had watched an overworked nurse struggle for 20 minutes with software that was supposed to make her job easier and instead made it a small daily hell. He'd asked her about it out of nervous habit more than curiosity, and she'd laughed bitterly and said every hospital system was held together with tape and prayers. That sentence lodged itself somewhere in him and never left. He started sketching ideas on the back of his father's discharge papers that same night. A simpler system. Something a tired nurse at 3 a.m. could actually use without wanting to throw the tablet across the room. He didn't tell Claire because in the beginning, it was nothing, a hobby, half-formed code. A folder on his desktop labeled maybe that he was almost embarrassed by. And then the months went by and it stopped being nothing. And somehow the longer it grew, the harder it became to bring it up. How do you tell your wife 3 years into a secret that the reason you've been quiet at dinner isn't distance? It's a company registration form sitting open in another tab. How do you explain that the version of you she thinks is fading is actually working? 60-hour weeks disguised as 40, because he was terrified of promising her something that might still fail. Owen told himself he was protecting her from disappointment. In truth, he realizes now, he was protecting himself from having to say it out loud and watch her face while he did. The night she left was not dramatic. There was no slammed door, no raised voices, no scene that would make for good television. Claire packed 2 suitcases on a Sunday afternoon while Owen was at the hardware store and left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Simply, I don't think either of us is happy, and I don't think staying quiet about it helps anymore. I'm sorry. I still care about you. I just can't keep waiting for something to change." He read it standing in the kitchen with the receipt for a new shower head still in his hand. He didn't call her. He didn't chase her car down the street. He sat down at the kitchen table, and after a long while, he went back into the back room, because it was the only place that had ever made sense to him, and he closed the door and he worked. The separation became a divorce within 8 months. Quiet and mutually agreed, the kind lawyers finish in an afternoon because there's no fight left in either party, just tiredness and a shared wish for it to be over cleanly. Claire moved into a bright apartment across town with big windows and exposed brick. The kind of place she used to say she wanted when they were young and broke and dreaming, out loud together. She told her sister she felt lighter. She told herself the same thing most mornings. Standing at her window with her coffee, watching a city that finally felt like it belonged to her instead of to a routine she'd outgrown. If she thought about Owen at all, it was with a soft, distant guilt, the kind you feel about a decision you still believe was right. But that cost someone else more than you're comfortable admitting. Owen, for his part, did not spiral the way people expect a heartbroken man to spiral. He didn't drink more. He didn't disappear into anger. If anything, something in him went quiet and then sharpened, like grief had burned off everything except the work. He moved the company, which by then had a name, Steadway Health, out of the back room and into a shared office space with two other people who believed in the same tired nurse problem he did. He hired his third employee the month his divorce was finalized. He hired his 10th the month after that. The software started small, in 2 regional hospitals that agreed to pilot it mostly out of desperation. Then it started working, the way things sometimes do when they're built by someone who actually listened to the person the tool was for. Word moved through hospital administrators the way it always does, quietly and then all at once. Within 2 years, Steadway Health was in 40 hospitals across 6 states. Within 3, a much larger healthcare technology company made Owen an offer that turned a decade of quiet nights into more money than he had ever imagined attaching to his own name. Claire found out the way most people find out things about someone they used to love. By accident, scrolling through a feed she didn't mean to linger on, a local news segment shared by a mutual friend about a hometown founder who'd sold his healthcare startup and was donating a significant portion of the proceeds to fund free electronic systems for rural clinics that could never have afforded them otherwise. The segment showed Owen standing in front of a modest building with a sign that read, Steadway Health, wearing one of the same 3 shirts she used to tease him about, talking calmly about a nurse he'd met years ago in a waiting room. Claire sat very still on her expensive new couch, in her apartment with the big windows, and watched a man she thought she knew explain, in plain and unremarkable words, exactly what he had been building the entire time she'd been calling him absent. She didn't reach out right away. What was there to say? Congratulations felt too small, and anything else felt like it belonged to a version of their story that no longer existed. But 3 weeks later, she found herself parked outside the small office building from the segment, telling herself she just wanted to see it, that it didn't have to mean anything. Owen came out to grab lunch and saw her before she could decide whether to leave. He didn't look surprised, and he didn't look angry either. He looked more than anything like a man who had made peace with something a long time ago and was mildly curious to see how the rest of it would play out. They sat on a bench outside, not in some grand office, no reveal built for effect, just 2 people who used to be married, talking like the strangers they'd somehow become. Claire told him she'd seen the segment. She told him she was proud of him, and she meant it. And she also told him quietly that she wished she had known, that if she had understood what those closed doors were actually holding, she might have stayed to find out. Owen didn't rush to comfort her, and he didn't twist the knife either. He simply told her the truth, the same way he'd told the reporter the truth, that he understood why she left, that a marriage isn't supposed to run on secrets, even well-intentioned ones, and that he'd spent a long time since the divorce, realizing his silence had cost them just as much as her leaving had. He wasn't angry at her anymore. He'd stopped being angry somewhere around the 40th hospital. He told her he didn't think they were owed a second chance just because the story had a happy ending on his side. Some things, once broken, stay broken even after you understand why they broke, and that was all right. What mattered more to him now, he said, was that he'd learned something he wished he'd known at 26. That being quiet isn't the same as having nothing to say, but it can look exactly the same to someone standing outside the door. And that the people who love you deserve better than your assumption that they'll wait forever to find out who you really are. Claire cried a little, not the dramatic kind, just the quiet kind that comes from realizing a truth a few years too late to change anything. Owen didn't cry. He just sat with her for a while. In the ordinary autumn light, 2 people who had once shared a life, and now shared something smaller and more honest. A mutual respect, hard-earned, for who the other person had actually turned out to be. Owen still runs Steadway Health today, though it's grown far beyond what he ever imagined. Sketching on the back of a discharge form, he still keeps that original folder on his desktop, still labeled maybe, because he says it reminds him where every big thing starts, quietly, awkwardly, without any guarantee it will ever become something worth mentioning at dinner. He never remarried, though he isn't close to it. He says he's simply more careful now about the difference between being quiet and being honest, and he tries every day not to let the two get confused again. Claire, for her part, tells the story sometimes to friends going through their own quiet marriages, not as a cautionary tale about Owen, but about herself, about how easy it is to mistake a person's silence for emptiness, when sometimes silence is just where the biggest things are still being built. And somewhere in a small city hospital, a nurse who has never met either of them logs into a system at 3 a.m. that actually works, finishes her charting in half the time, and goes to check on her next patient, never knowing that her small complaint in a waiting room years ago quietly changed the direction of two people's entire lives.